Hello and welcome to the Old Library at London's Guildhall, where we're all waiting to hear who'll be the winner of this year's Booker Prize. The award will be presented here, live, in about 40 minutes. The Booker is Britain's best-known literary award and the most controversial. It's worth £15,000, and that's just the start of it. And it's accompanied each autumn by a wash of consternation, rumours and guesswork. The prize is meant to be for the best novel published in the United Kingdom during the last year by an author from the Commonwealth, the Republic of Ireland, Pakistan or South Africa. Over the last few months, the judges have had to read 103 novels, and a month ago they selected their shortlist. The 6 choices are Peter Keri, a young Australian who lives in Sydney. He's worked in advertising, he's written short stories, and one earlier novel. His book is called Illiwaka. J.L. Carr, who comes from the North Riding and now lives in Northamptonshire. He's been a teacher, had his own small publishing business, and he's a novelist and writer for children. The title of his shortlisted novel is The Battle of Pollock's Crossing. Keri Hulme is unfortunately unable to be here tonight. She lives in New Zealand and is of part Maori ancestry. Her book is The Bone People. Doris Lessing is one of the world's best-known novelists. She comes from what's now Zimbabwe and has lived in England since the 1950s. Her book is The Good Terrorist. Jan Morris lives in Wales and is one of Britain's most distinguished travel writers. Her book, Last Letters from Havre, is her first novel. Iris Murdoch, like Doris Lessing, is a novelist of worldwide reputation. Her book is The Good Apprentice, and it's her 22nd novel. This year, the Booker has been judged by a panel of 5. At times, the panels have been as controversial as the shortlist, but this looks basically solid enough. The chairman of the judges is the Right Honourable Norman St John Stevens, a former Minister of the Arts who's also an author, editor and journalist. The other judges are Nina Borden, who's well known as a novelist, as a writer for children and as a reviewer for the Daily Telegraph. J.W. Lambert, who was for many years the arts and literary editor of the Sunday Times and now sits on a number of panels and arts trusts. Joanna Lumley, the actress, has also been judging the prize, but unfortunately she can't be here tonight. Marina Warner, who's an author and critic and has written books on the cult of the Virgin Mary, Joan of Arc, and her latest book is called The Female Form. Every year people complain that the Booker Prize is turning the writing and reading of fiction into a publisher's horse race. With me now is Matthew Evans, the chairman of Faber and Faber. Matthew, do you think that publishers are now looking for Booker Prize material in the novels?
No, not at all. I think, every publisher looks for good writing, good creative writing to publish, and the Booker show, as one could call it, is really an event, an annual event. We can't determine what we publish by the requirements of the Booker Prize, and this is just a good evening. It's the theatre has the Sweats Awards and we have the Booker Prize, but we leave tonight and we forget about it for a year and we get on with making editorial decisions about writings we're offered.
But it can radically change an author's commercial life and the amount of public he or she reaches, as we saw last year with Anita Brooker.
Yes.
And does it never cross your lips in an editorial then that this might be good Booker Prize material?
Well, if one works for a publisher that publishes literary fiction, you tend to publish the type of book that will be a contender for the Booker Prize. But, certainly at Faber's, I've never heard anybody say, and I'm sure this is true of other British publishing houses, let's take this on because it stands a chance with the Booker Prize.
So there's no sense in which a sort of Booker Prize type novel is emerging?
No, I don't think there is a Booker Prize type novel. I think in your introduction you talked about the judges, and it's really the judges that determine what's chosen. We continue publishing, and every year 5 judges make a highly subjective judgment on what should be on the shortlist. All of us disagree with it, in the press, in publishing, in the media generally. And we don't take it that seriously.
Well, there you go. Now here's Hermione Lee back in the studio to introduce the 6 authors, each talking about his or her own book.
Thank you. We begin alphabetically with Peter Keri. His short stories, Exotic Pleasures, and his first novel, Bliss, were praised for their surreal, inventive comedy. Illiwaka is a huge, funny, picaresque epic of 20th century Australia, whose narrator, Herbert Badgery, is a 139-year-old confidence trickster, home builder, bigamist, aeronaut and Anglophobe. This is how Peter Keri described his central character.
Herbert Badgery is an Illiwaka. An Illiwaka in Australian slang anyway is somebody who's a confidence man, a trickster and a liar. And what this common confidence man or trickster or liar discovers is that his lies keep on coming true. And he begins by lying about this great Australian aeroplane that he wants to build somewhere in 1919, and discovers the damn thing nearly comes true. And from these very, if you like, optimistic beginnings, which I think reflect the optimism of that period, we move through by the end of the book to find that Herbert and his family are selling and exporting Australian animals and birds as pets, and they've become prisoners of their own pet factory or pet shop. And this, of course, has certain allegorical resonances, at least, and probably reflects on one of the great lies which the book, I think, examines, which is that Australians see themselves as a proud and free and anti-authoritarian people. And I think Herbert Badgery and perhaps even the author thinks that this is possibly not true.
J.L. Carr has written 5 novels. His last, A Month in the Country, was shortlisted for the Booker Prize in 1980. It's a quite absorbing story set after the Great War about an artist restoring a painting in a Yorkshire church. The Battle of Pollock's Crossing is concise and deceptively jolly in tone. Its hero's comic visit to America turns into a dark and alarming story of violence and betrayal. He began by telling us when his novel is set.
Well, it happened in 1929. A young Yorkshireman called George Gidner felt that he must go and live somewhere else and found himself teaching school in Dakota on the prairie. And roughly the story is what happened to him there. He found that the Americans are as foreign to him, although he could speak the language, as outer Mongolians. Life becomes even more complicated when he's cornered by a banker who's living a fantasy life of his own in an England that never was, though he never went there. And George Gidner watches in appalled consternation of what goes on and what happens to him. And it all ends up in the darkness, in a store, out in the prairie at Pollock's Crossing.
Keri Hulme has written short stories and poems, but nothing on such an ambitious scale as The Bone People, which took 12 years to expand from a short story to a long novel. Part rhapsodic stream of consciousness, part down-to-earth New Zealand and Maori dialogue. It's the story of a tough, solitary woman, Kerowin, who becomes involved with a hard-drinking man and his foster child, a mute with a mysterious history. She was filmed in New Zealand talking about her book.
The Bone People is about 3 people, a man, a woman, a child. The man is Maori with a little addition of Pākehā. The woman is mainly Pākehā, but she's got a Maori input. The child is all Pākehā. They come together, they get to know one another, they break apart in an episode of disastrous violence, and towards the end their paths are knit together again. A very simple story indeed. The book deals with aspects of New Zealand society that are generally swept under the rug. Our lack of communication with one another, the violence that riddles both cultures. But the most important theme, as far as I'm concerned, is the validity and pertinency of taha wairua, Maori wairua, Maori spirituality, and the way we have of looking at people and their relationships and people's relationships with the land, the dead, our ancestors as well. It's, despite the violence and various gruesome bits in it, I find it to be a book of some considerable joy, because people do work out their fates. It does have a kind of a happy ending. It's a recipe, I suppose, for people to be blatant individualists and still love themselves at the end of it. It's got good recipes for Flanders in it too.
Doris Lessing's writing began in the 1940s and includes The Golden Notebook, Martha Quest, the first of the Children of Violence series, and the Canopus in Argus novels, which began with Shikasta, and most recently 2 novels written under the pseudonym of Jane Summers. The Good Terrorist is about an immature middle-class girl, Alice, who's reacted violently against her parents and is living in a squat of self-styled revolutionaries. We asked her what inspired the novel.
It was the Harrods bombing, actually, which triggered it off. And what fascinated me about that, how it was reported in the media, was it sounded like an amateur job. And I started to wonder how it could come about that an amateur group should do something on those lines. And once having started to think about it, I got completely fascinated by it. And I started to remember all kinds of things in my past that would be useful, not least that I was once read myself in my 20s. And these groups, this kind of group, the kind of emotional patterns do keep repeated. They're repeated the whole time, you know, decade after decade. The same things keep happening. So I was able to draw upon that, and a lot of my friends are still very political. So I centered it on this girl, Alice, or rather she's a woman, though she's a very immature girl in herself. And what interested me about her was that she is in fact an extremely kind, caring, warm-hearted, etc., and so forth girl who is perfectly happy to blow everything up. And this combination, I think, is extremely common in revolutionaries. You'll find revolutionaries throughout the ages, kind to their cats, listening to Beethoven and worrying about the old woman next door, but quite happy to blow cities up or to murder people. It's interesting.
Jan Morris's books include Pax Britannica, a trilogy about the British Empire, Among the Cities, a selection of travel essays and books on Spain and Venice. Last Letters from Have is written in the form of a straight-faced travel guide to an extraordinary anomalous city somewhere between the Mediterranean and Asia, whose culture is an amalgam of every civilization under the sun. We asked her to tell us about the book.
I'll tell you, I'd spent a lifetime really wandering around the world, looking at and writing about cities. And at the end, I've come to the conclusion that I ought to end this career. But I thought I'd like to create a sort of summation of this odyssey in some way. And I thought of the idea of inventing a city into which I could insert my own emotions about cities and about many other things too. So I created a place somewhere in the Levant, in which I could not only express the things that I personally find most interesting about cities, but I could also express the conclusions that I've reached in the course of this long journey. The conclusion is this, that having written about several hundred cities in my lifetime, I really don't know anything about them whatever. So the book is an allegory of bewilderment. I'm bewildered really by cities, and I think the citizens of cities are bewildered, and I think the citizens of the world are bewildered. They don't know what's going on all around them. In this book, the narrator, which is a kind of parody of me, because part of it is a joke on me, you know, the parody of me gets into a city and finds herself more and more tangled and embroiled and bewildered by what's going on in there, and so are the citizens around her. And the end of the book is that these huge outside forces, undefined or ill-defined, which truly exist in the world, fall upon the city in some way, I don't know exactly how, and bring it, as the narrator knew it, to an end. There are several subsidiary allegories, and one of them is that at the end, the citizens of the city themselves, who have been very, very inhibited and entangled themselves in the affairs of the city, are left to be fallen upon. But the simplest of all the citizens, who are the aboriginals of the cave country above the city, they're the only ones who seem to be about to survive in peace. They're the ones who are the closest to the animals and closest to the nature. And I have reached the conclusion that the innocent are going to inherit the earth.
Iris Murdoch's first novel, Under the Net, was published in 1954. She's produced almost a novel a year since then, one of which, The Sea, was the Booker Prize winner in 1978. She's also an Oxford philosopher and has written books on the sovereignty of good, on Sartre and on Plato. The Good Apprentice is a characteristic exploration of guilt, anxiety, adultery and moral endeavour. We asked her to describe it.
It's a story about two brothers, stepbrothers actually, one of whom is overwhelmed by guilt. He's in a very obsessed, unhappy, guilty state. And the other boy is in perhaps equal difficulties, having decided to devote his life to virtue, to becoming good, but not in the context of any religious institution, because he doesn't believe in God or anything, but just by himself. He thinks this is something that one might devote one's life to, as priests used to. And it's about religion and magic, and how religion tends to degenerate into magic, and how unlike true goodness is from magical solutions to one's difficulties and power. And the guilty boy, seeking his real father, goes away into a sort of enchanted world where this man, who is a painter, lives as a sort of strange god, a sort of maverick spiritual power, a spiritual power which has got loose and hasn't got any clear connection with the contrast between good and evil, as in Christianity. And I think the world at present is full of such powers, wild spiritual powers. And it's about the salvation, in a way, of the guilty boy, which really consists in recovery from his guilt, and the conflict between the religious person and the magical person. When the brother who's devoted to goodness comes to rescue his brother who's under an enchantment, there is a conflict between magical power and the power of good.
Those are the 6 authors on this year's shortlist. Now, back to the old library at the Guildhall.
Thanks. Well, that's the shortlist, but of course not everybody agrees with the selection. As usual, journalists on the book pages have been compiling alternative booker shortlists, as well as librarians endorse it. We've asked Claire Tomlin, the literary editor of the Sunday Times, to give her view. Now, first of all, this list has been heavily bashed, perhaps more heavily bashed than most lists. What do you think of it as a selection of books?
Well, we all know there's a lot of malice in the literary world. There's going to be flack flying, self-righteous trumpetings about the whole thing being an insult to literature. But this isn't quite fair to the judges. After all, they have to work with the books there are. You can't blame them if we haven't got War and Peace or Sons and Lovers on this year. 1985, we haven't got War and Peace or Sons and Lovers, but it's a fine vintage set of judges, incorruptible, enthusiastic, very well read, and many of them have said to me that they would have liked the shortlist to be longer.
Do you think it's a fairly well-balanced list, then, the six books that we've been talking about?
It is an amazingly various list, in length, in fame, in lack of fame, 2 hemispheres.
What do you think, which books do you think, passionately think, should have been on?
Well, I'm not sure that I feel passionately, but there are 1 or 2 books that I miss from it. For instance, Jonathan Rayburn's Foreign Land, a sort of hate letter to contemporary England. It's a very sour book, very well written. He's always worth reading. Then there's Alice Thomas Ellis, Unexplained Laughter, a Catholic writer. There's a singeing feeling, a burning feeling in all her books. You feel people are consigned to hell if they haven't got impeccable good taste or if they're not simple-minded, as in this book. I think she's an arresting novelist. I'd have liked to have seen her there. A.S. Byatt's Still Life is a solid chunk of a book. It's about woman's experience. Well, Radio 3 woman. It's childbirth, culture, that sort of thing. But it is an ambitious and well-thought-out book.
Are these the final? Are these the ones that you most miss on the list?
Well, no, I'm coming to them, too. I think I've heard more people lament the omission of Peter Ackroyd, Hawksmoor, than any other book. It's a difficult book. It's a mixture of Gothic, horror, detective story, brilliant pastiche of 18th century London. He's really a marvellous writer.
And finally?
Most of all, I miss, personally, Anita Bruckner's book, Family and Friends. A better book even than Hotel du Lac, which won last year. She writes about agony like nobody else.
Claire Tomlin, thank you very much. Now we'll take a short break. Afterwards, our own panel, Germaine Greer, John Carey and Paul Theroux, will give their opinions on the books. Then we'll be back here live for the announcement of the winner and the presentation of the prize itself. Welcome back to the Booker Prize live from the old library at the Guildhall. As some of you know, the book has become a bit like the boat race, part of the national punting pool, and Ladbrokes offer odds on the Good Terrorist 6-4, the Bone People 3-1, Iliwaka 7-2, the Good Apprentice 7-2, Last Letters from Havre 10-1, and the Battle of Pollock's Crossing 16-1. Now Hermione Lee, back in our studios, is joined by our own panel to discuss the books on that shortlist.
With me in the studio are John Carey, Merton Professor of English at Oxford and author of books on Dickens, Thackeray and John Donne. Germaine Greer, polemicist, broadcaster and writer, whose books include The Female Eunuch and Sex and Destiny. And Paul Theroux, novelist and travel writer, whose fiction includes Mosquito Coast and Dr. Slaughter, and whose most recent travel book is The Imperial Way. I think for the sake of variety, we should talk about the books in reverse alphabetical order. So could we start with Iris Murdoch? And can I ask you, John Carey, what you think of The Good Apprentice?
Well, it's very clever, like everything Iris Murdoch writes. And it also seems to me to fall into two parts. There's a kind of fancy dress part and there's a kind of moralistic part. And the fancy dress part, which is set in this curious castle or big house by the sea, Seaguard, with the three women in their pre-Raphaelite clothes, is actually very well done, I think, in that you think it's rather soppy and innocent to start with, and then it becomes sinister. You realise they've got this artist, Baltram, as a kind of prisoner come invalid. The moralistic part, I think, is rather disgusting in a way. I mean, the adulterers, Midge and Harry, and Harry's unspeakably awful. No, I know men are horrible. They're not as horrible as that. He's so stupid and arrogant and shallow. They are sort of held up for punishment by the novelist. I feel uncomfortable when I see that happening. It's like a sort of public execution. The best thing I thought that came out of it was really the good figure Stuart, whom everyone detests until the end when they realise he's done some good. But he just tries to be, not a Christian, he's not a Christian, just tries to do good, like Dostoevsky's Idiot. And that was a clever idea, I think.
Like Dostoevsky, I think she is extraordinarily good at obsession and remorse and states of mind you can't get out of. Paul Theroux, what did you think?
Yes, I think it's a tremendously good study of guilt and remorse after an accidental death, which is actually precipitated by one of the characters, Edward. He goes into a depression. And I think that his guilty phase is extremely well done. There are an awful lot of characters in this novel. There are an awful lot of plot lines. You understand what Edward is doing, and Edward's looking for his father, of course, and then other characters intrude. Now, those characters also, as in other Iris Murdoch novels, have interesting lives, but you're not quite as interested in them as you are in the other characters. I actually think that it's very plotty, this book, very plotty.
Too many characters, do you mean?
It's too many tergiversations. What gets me down is, somebody sees a mouse in the underground and his entire mental outlook changes, and then he sees something else and it changes again. I get a feeling that there's no such thing as constancy in human beings, that our emotional life, as she sees it, is something frivolous almost. It's all on the turn of a coin. I find something thin and mean in this view of humanity.
Don't you think people are like that? They don't know what they're doing half the time?
No, but they tend to go on being themselves. And it seems to me that in a Murdoch novel, they're capable of all kinds of strange metamorphoses. And there is the curious sort of mythic, Grayley, Mallory, Tolkien-y thing about the trip to the underworld, of the enchanter's castle, and the strange, obvious symbolism which she doesn't scruple to underline and say, oh, by the way, in case you didn't know what that was the enchanter's castle falling to pieces. And you think, come on, I mean, there's something condescending towards people. And the worst character, of course, the worst treated of the characters is the one most like me. It's poor old Elspeth McCran, whom I quite like.
The feminist. Let's go on to Jan Morris's novel, Last Letters from Havre. Paul Theroux, did you have special feelings about this as a travel writer yourself?
I don't know whether I had special feelings about it, but I did feel that it was somewhat inanimate. I don't think it actually caught fire and came to life. It's odd when a person who has distinguished herself by writing great travel pieces and brought places to life in the way that Jan Morris has, decides to write a novel. I think novels late in life can be dangerous things and sometimes look a bit odd. And I felt that there was an oddness in this, that it wasn't as funny as her best travel writing, and it wasn't as physical in the way that her best travel writing is. I couldn't make up my mind whether she was having a go at herself or just whether she had discovered a way of writing a novel. In the right hands, I think it's a great subject, the idea of writing about an imaginary place, as if it existed, Erewhon or something like that. But I actually felt that this didn't come off.
I felt rather like Catherine Mansfield saying of E.M. Forster, it's a lovely teapot, but there ain't going to be no tea. It seemed like preparation for something that never happened. Germaine, what did you think?
Well, I read it in rather a skulking and horrid way because I read it trying to discover more about the character, Jan Morris, because I think Jan Morris is a self-created entity. And I was looking particularly to see how this narrator emerges. And one of the things that I really found startling, because it was so obvious in a way, was the girlishness of the style. We actually had the lost exclamation point, the little giggly exclamation point, and silly words like splodgy and wodgy. And it's eventually I began to create this myth of my own about how Havre was invented. And I imagined it being a sort of family game. So we're on a very long and boring car journey. Let's invent a place. What is their national dish? Their national dish is sea urchins.
Yes, yes.
It seemed to be very obvious that Jan Morris had never eaten a sea urchin.
Anything more than a family game, John Keri?
I think it is a curiously empty book. It's written out of great affection. It's skillfully written, one has to say that. Of course, she's a skillful writer, but it's written out of an affection for a kind of glamour and glitter and cultural triviality, it seems to me, which is all put together without any centre to the book. So that by the end, when she attempts to introduce a kind of apocalyptic theme, some battleships arrive from somewhere, there's nothing which in any logical way leads to that. It hasn't actually got a driving force to it. I thought the best thing about it were the chapter headings, which would imitate the chapter headings of 19th century travel books. So the strange phrases with dashes between them, like visit to the troglodytes, terrible story of X. So that was really very clever and funny, I thought. Much better than the chapters themselves.
Yes, let's go on to talk about the Doris Lessing, The Good Terrorist. What did you make of that?
Well, I think that it's a book which tries to present terrorism through a very sort of Daily Telegraph reader's viewpoint, actually. You have this girl, Alice, who has had a good upbringing, middle-class mother, everything she's ever needed in life, and who's obviously twisted and vicious and hateful and full of hate herself. She hates the suburban life and so on. She's attached to this boy, Jasper, who is clearly worthless. And the other people in the house, in this communist squat, are disturbed, all of them in various ways. It is a very concentrated novel. I mean, you do get bound up with their wish to replenish the house, to clean it out, get rid of all the stuff that's filling the lavatories and so on, and put on the water and the electricity. But I feel it's a bit like doing woodwork. I mean, you know, you feel that you're having a time learning about practical matters, but it's not very like literature, really.
Did you think it was a reactionary book, Germaine, in the sense that all left-wing causes in the book seem to be tarred with the same brush?
Well, not Daily Telegraph reactionary. I think it's probably a conservative left-wing reactionary. Let's get rid of the character defect left. But it's one of the functions of novels, I'd have thought, to make you understand kinds of behaviour which are not normally terribly understandable. And I don't think this novel makes any attempt to understand. The judgment is made from the beginning. If one is repelled by the judgment of Harry and Midge, you have to be repelled by this terrifically superior, cold, distant eye. I think it's a timely book, but I think it also isn't terribly helpful because we ought to understand the phenomenon, and I think in a way she makes it less understandable. You really can't explain people's political attitudes as a result of psychosis. If you do that, you're just begging the question, I think.
Paul through.
Well, I didn't think that people had any political attitudes. I thought that one of the deficiencies in the book was that you really didn't know what they stood for. But one of the virtues of the book was that you knew everything about how people begin to inhabit a place, how they take root, and how they do housework, and how they get the gas and electricity turned on and unblock the toilet. That sort of Robinson Crusoe detail I find compelling, and because it's about something. It's attached to something, and there is a certain stink of reality about it. But as far as the political ideas, it was a series of blunders, a chapter of accidents, where it was only in passing that they happened to mention that this was, I think it was a mistake, that the bomb was planted by the IRA. It is about a bombing.
They're incompetent, aren't they? They're not in control of what they're doing.
Yes, and I actually think that that may be true, but it doesn't make the book, it doesn't give the book more power. I think as far as Doris Lessing's books go, I think this is certainly one of her better books. But I was wondering about it. I don't think it's a reactionary book, though.
Can we talk now about Keri Hulme's book, The Bone People? Pull through, what did you think of it?
I don't have a lot to say about The Bone People. I found The Bone People unreadable.
Why?
I think that there's a problem with the construction, and I think it's a problem of point of view. I think it's really a book that is extremely crudely written and presented. I also think it's rather unfocused. I couldn't tell where these voices were coming from, who they were about, and I never actually saw particular crisp pictures, the sort that one is used to in a Booker Prize candidate.
Yes. I thought it was gripping but sentimental. John Keri.
I thought it was magnificent, actually. Sentimental right at the end, because I think she didn't ruin the novel, but she certainly should not, in my opinion, have saved the woman from a death by cancer at the end and made a happy marriage out of the whole thing. But it's about a child who is battered appallingly by this man, about the girl finding out about it. It's about New Zealand, essentially. It seems to me the way it recreates the shorescapes, the food, the smells, the voices, the whole Maori culture is simply compelling. I found it, I couldn't put it down.
I thought that there is certainly a very powerful and strong presence in the heroine, Kerowin. How did you react to her, Jermaine?
Well, I came to it after the aridity of Iris Murdoch, which dried me out, rather. And I was actually sitting on a train and began to read this thinking, oh, God. And I stumbled through all that strange typesetting and stuff at the beginning. And it gradually absolutely grabbed me completely. Because it's true in a way to say it's sentimental, but it's also the most anti-sentimental book you can imagine, because every single emotional situation escapes cliché, generally turns right round on top of itself and smacks you in the mouth. And you begin to understand violence and aggression as part of a deep attachment, which is something I had never understood before. And I really like a book that makes me understand a whole dimension of human behaviour that I read about in the paper and can't grasp. I think it's extremely mannered. It is crudely written. It's true that the point of view is obscured. Some pages are absolutely lamentable. But I think this is really what we're after. And what we're after is a talent that should be fostered. Discipline can come next. What you want first is the talent. And it's there in bags, I think.
Are you saying that what we're after as looking for a Booker Prize book is something new and odd, and also something from another country?
And something which is committed to something really important and powerful. I mean, this is dealing with a vital problem about, as you say, how love comes out of cruelty. I don't entirely believe in Joe, the child batterer, and I wish one actually that one had gone more deeply into him. But this dumb boy with the singing in his head and the strange past and the nightmares out of which he wakes screaming, and the need for the man who is killing him, I mean, who actually nearly blinds and deafens him in the end by the final battering, that is extremely powerful.
But there's also a much darker picture there. And I think if she'd actually been true to her own imaginative vision, she would have ended the book in the blackest tragedy. She just quails. Because it is about the rape of Maori culture, the imposition of an inadequate culture which is mostly sustained by alcohol. And the book is awash in a sea of drink. And that's what gets the child battered. And that is part of the Antipodean heritage. We are a nation, we're not a nation, we're two nations of drunks.
But she does let them off the hook at the end, perhaps a bit. Anyway, let's go on and talk about the J.L. Carr novel, which is the Battle of Pollock's Crossing. Jermaine, what did you think of that?
I thought this was a book about writing a book, in a way. The imposition of the Tristram Shandy mode on the narrative really, to my mind, doesn't work, partly because somehow the cadence is gone. I mean, it keeps referring to that as the imaginative source. It keeps referring to 18th century sentimentalism and to Augustinism and so on, but it's not really there. Sometimes the ear goes really dead, and all these strange people tottering around in Dakota talking in Johnsonian sentences. I can see the way the game has been played, but I think it was played perhaps for too long. Somehow it's become embalmed.
I like the sense that one got of the sort of vast, strange spaces of America. So you get to a shop and it says free iced water 379 miles on. All those sorts of jokes I thought were very good. Pull through, what did you think of it?
Yes, I think the sense of place is very strong. And I did think that it took a while for the story to catch fire. It took ages for this man to actually get there, meet his class. He was a teacher after all. And what he was actually writing about was a sort of preparation. I thought once the story got going, and that was about 50 pages in, then he seemed to be writing about something. He seemed to be writing about the life of a town, of a very small town. And he was an alien in that town and a kind of Martian figure. And I thought that he brought off very well.
Okay.
Yes, I liked it. I mean, it's a kind of miniature, but it's a miniature with vistas, isn't it? As you look into the miniature, you see South Dakota plains, and you see the history of the place, these extraordinary stories told very quickly about the girl killed in the prairie fire, which is a marvellous bit of the book. And you also see behind this man, the man with the 18th century in his mind, as it were, Farewell, you see the whole culture that he is trying to assimilate. He's never been to England, but he thinks in that way. And so it builds to a climax that I found very moving when Farewell, who is a bank manager who gives all the money away to save the farmers, and is mobbed and killed, gunned down. When he's dying in this shack, the hero has to think of something to say to him. There's this man with a few seconds to live, and he says, Carr doesn't tell you what it is, but he quotes from Bunyan's Pilgrim's Progress about going across the river, and it's extremely moving the way that whole literary heritage moves in there.
I was surprised by what looked to be a comic book turning out to be so disturbing and I thought moving as well. John Keri, what did you think about our last book, Peter Carey's Illywacker?
It's magnificent. It is a superb, massive book, of course. It's extremely funny and very tragic at the same time. I mean, it's got the way of bringing those two things together. Extremely funny, for example, I mean, this extraordinary character at the centre of the novel, one of my favourite scenes is when he's making love on the roof to Phoebe, his first wife, and Phoebe's mother, who has tried to keep Phoebe away from all men, shouts up, thinking he's mending the roof, of course. I don't know if Phoebe's up there, these two naked, this naked couple on the roof, and she's saying, would you like a cup of tea when you're through? And he also shouts out, thank you very much, Mrs. McGrath. It's very funny, right through to the end, when this man's son runs the biggest pet shop in the world, smuggles dying species out of the country, and there's this Hisayo, his son, with a golden-shouldered parrot stitched into his trousers, bound up carefully in cotton, and one of the women passengers grabs him to make love, and alas, the last golden-shouldered parrot spurts, great blood all over the front of Hisayo's trousers. So it is very funny, very sad. It's simply unending. It's a wonderful sort of gold mine of a book.
Paul Theroux, did you find it more readable than the New Zealand novel on the list?
Yes, and it's interesting that you should mention that New Zealand novel because there's a lot of Maori lingo in the Bone People, which is incomprehensible in the book. There's a lot of Australian slang in Illywacker, Peter Carey's book, but Peter Carey gives you the language in context. You understand what a goog is, or you know, I don't know, didgeridoo and all the other business, which were totally unfamiliar to Vegemite. There's a goanna in a Vegemite jar. And at the end of it, I knew what this fellow was talking about. I think it's a marvelous book. I think it's quite a feat of imagination. It's an extremely clever feat of tone, being able to use formal language and also slang. I actually think it's the most successful of the bunch.
What did you think of it, Jermaine?
Well, it belongs in a tradition, and the tradition, I suppose, goes back to Such Is Life by Tom Collins, which is the pseudonym of Joseph Furphy. And the important part of it is that you have a protagonist who is not correct, who is wrong about things, and who is a terrible liar. Except in Such Is Life, I think it's done in a much more disciplined way. And I think the other parent is Henry Lawson, to whom Keri refers consciously and unconsciously all the time. I get a bit worried about another dimension of it, though, which is actually present in a number of the books we've had to look at, which I call the sort of post-Tolkien astigmatism. So it really doesn't matter if things are true or false, if they're historically exact or not, if places are where they're supposed to be or not, that as if an imaginary realm would be more interesting than a real realm.
Well, I felt he was doing what Salman Rushdie does with India, which is in Midnight's Children, which is to reinvent it, to make it his own place, and I liked that.
There's a tradition of books about liars. I actually think that as a genre, books about liars are terrible, and this is one that I actually liked. I mean, as soon as a character says, my name is Herbert Badgery, I'm a liar, I prepare myself for the worst.
Well, we must now all tell the truth, which is to say which of these books we would like to win the Booker Prize and which of these books we think the judges is going to choose. Jermaine.
I would like Keri Hulme to win it because I think in all the incrustations there's a really major talent there. But I suppose they'll go for Illiwacker. It's more accessible.
John.
That's terrible. I agree entirely. I mean, I would like Keri Hulme to win it too. It's a very uneven book. It's got lots of mistakes, but it has in the middle of it something I think more important than Peter Carey has, wonderful as he is and poetic as he is. But I think Peter Carey will win it.
Paul?
Well, I think the Keri Hulme should write a few more books and then we should judge whether she's a good writer or a bad writer. I think this is a first novel and shows it. I actually think that Illiwacker is the best of the bunch. I think it probably won't win. I think The Good Terrorist will win by Doris Lessing.
Yes, I agree with you entirely. And now for the judge's decision, back to the old library at the Guildhall.
Thanks. So, 2 votes for Lessing and 2 for Carey. Now we'll see. Here's Michael Caine, chairman of Booker McConnell.
Ladies and gentlemen, we now come to the main purpose of the evening, and it gives me great pleasure to call upon Norman St. John Stevers to announce the winner of the 1985 Booker Prize.
Mr. Chairman and ladies and gentlemen, this is a great literary occasion here in the Guildhall tonight, where we are all assembled for the award of what is, thanks to Booker McConnell, the most valuable and also the most prestigious literary prize in Britain. And when I have made the announcement of the winner, Mr. Michael Caine will hand over the cheque to the winning author. As Mae West once said, God is love, but get it in writing. One should not drop names, as Her Majesty the Queen said to me only the other week. But tonight, I have had to turn down 2 prime ministers, our own and that of Hungary, who are dining at number 10. When I asked the Prime Minister for permission to be absent, I told her that I would be lynched if I didn't turn up here, an intelligence which he received with remarkable equanimity. But she said, "Oh, it's an important occasion, Norman, off you go." The judges have had a fiendishly difficult task going through 103 novels, and this afternoon we had to consider a short list of 6, any one of which is worthy of carrying off the prize. How envious we felt of Mr. Disraeli, who, when he was asked by a lady whether he had read George Eliot's Middlemarch, replied, "Madam, when I want to read a novel, I write one." May I remind you what this prize is for? It is not for being top of the pops. It is not for providing a riveting yarn or an easy read, though the winner may, in fact, do that too. It is for a major and serious contribution to contemporary English fiction. All our magnificent 6 do that. I take them now, in order, but you are warned to attach no significance to the order in which they come. First, there's the splendid book from Australia, Illiwacker, Australian for Tall Storyteller by Peter Carey. It's a masterpiece of storytelling, vivid, varied, compassionate, funny, a novel in the tradition of Smollett and Sterne, the portrait painting of the heart. But it's long. Some might say too long. Has it won? We shall see. Then there's The Battle of Pollock's Crossing by E.L. Carr. It's beautifully constructed and vividly written. Like all great novels, it has the consecrating power. But it's short. Some might say too short. But has its economy, its control, and its balance won? We shall know the answer in a few moments from now. The third book on my list is The Good Terrorist by Doris Lessing. Miss Lessing has returned from outer space with her genius intact. Her book discharges a major function of art. It shows us what is going on in the society in which we live. It's powerful, but has it hypnotized the judges? Time alone will tell. Fourth is another book from the Commonwealth, this time from New Zealand, The Bone People by Keri Hulme. It's a highly poetic book filled with striking imagery and insights. Its three characters fascinate and intrigue. It seems to be only about child battering, but it's rarely about love. Is its theme too disturbing, or is it a winner? Fifth, I come to The Good Apprentice by Iris Murdoch. Miss Murdoch is one of contemporary literature's brightest stars. In this deeply moral book, she deals scintillating with some of the great themes of human existence: guilt, forgiveness, redemption. She's on top form with her 22nd novel. She's already won the Booker once. Has she made history and carried it off a second time? We shall see. Sixth, I come to Last Letters from Havre by Jan Morris, who has written some of the finest travel books of our time, including a sparkler about Venice. In this short book, with its evocative and moving picture of the beautiful but doomed city of Havre, she has distilled the essence of her experiences. She has fulfilled Matthew Arnold's imperative with regard to a work of art. She has instructed and she has entertained, and she has done more than that. She has extended the frontiers of fiction. But has she grabbed the book up? I'll tell you in 60 seconds. That rarely is what you want to know. So I'll cease to babble and reveal the truth. The Booker Prize, like British politics, is half a crusade and half a sporting event. And the book which has carried off the double laurels is The Bone People by Keri Hulme.
Well, Keri Hulme was a well-tipped outsider. Not to boast about it, I'll be silly, but I tipped her myself on TVAM this morning. She can't be here tonight, so her prize is being collected by Marian Evans of the Spiral Collective, the feminist publishing house in New Zealand, which first published The Bone People. And they're going up to the prize singing a Maori song, I think. Congratulations, Yann.
Congratulations to you and to Keri Hulme. Here is a book and a gift for Jane. Thank you very much.
Well done. Keri Hulme is in America lecturing at the moment, and we've just managed to contact her in Salt Lake City on the phone. Here she is now talking to Hermione Lee.
Hello, Keri Hulme. Hello, Keri Hulme.
Keri Hulme here, yes.
Hello, congratulations on winning the 1985 Booker Prize. We're very sorry that you can't be with us tonight. Are you pleased?
You are pulling my leg, aren't you?
No, it's true. You have won the Booker Prize.
Bloody hell.
Yeah. What is, apart from bloody hell, what is your first reaction? Are you pleased that as a New Zealander?
Totally unbelievable.
Are you pleased that as a New Zealander you have won this prize?
Exceptionally pleased, because this must mean in some larger way that New Zealand literature gets a look in elsewhere than in New Zealand.
Yes, quite. Do you think that it's an extraordinary thing that you've sort of penetrated the heart of the British literary establishment in this way?
My goodness, yes. For an amateur's book that sort of was put together over a long period of time and then was published by a dedicated group of women who had, well, they published other books and hadn't sort of gone for anything as ambitious as this. It's amazing.
Your friends are here tonight, and it seems to be a book which is very much written with your friends and comes out of your relationship with the collective of workers. Is that true?
Yes. I always maintain that without Spiral Collective, without Marianne Evans and Miriam Evans and Eddie Hapati Ramsden, there wouldn't be any book.
Yes. Are you working on something now?
Yes, I'm working on another novel which is tentatively titled Bait, which is, to put it pretentiously, about death.
Does it, like the Bone People, come out of your own experience and your own place where you live?
In a way. The Bone People does not actually come out of my experience. It's really completely fiction. Bait does.
Good. Well, congratulations again, and I'm sorry to have taken you so unawares with this splendid piece of news.
You have certainly taken me unawares.
And you're sitting in the middle of Salt Lake City.
I am, in a hotel called The Sheraton.
Well done, and thank you. Goodbye, Keri Hulme, and now I'll return you to Malvern Bragg.
So that's Hermione Lee on the phone to Salt Lake City, and Keri Hulme's delighted friend sitting there at the table. The Booker Prize has been won to repeat by Keri Hulme. That's all from us, though we hope to be here next year with our host, Booker McConnell. Until then, from this Book Force special, good night.